This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by Americans for a Clean Energy Grid. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast, my guest is former Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, Chair Jon Wellinghoff. Jon's going to describe the macrogrid initiative created to drive modernization of the nation's electric network by interconnecting the nation's segmented regions to make electricity delivery more reliable and affordable. Jon was appointed a FERC commissioner by President Bush in 2006, and after being appointed chair by President Obama in 2009, oversaw Order 1000, a pioneering ruling on transmission planning and cost allocation. Jon's experience also includes time as general counsel of the Nevada Public Utilities Commission and as a private sector energy attorney and executive. He's currently CEO of global consultant GridPolicy. So, Jon, if I remember correctly, the macrogrid concept of a national transmission system was a really live issue when you were at FERC. What is the basic idea of a macrogrid, sorry about that, macrogrid? What were those early iterations of it that you were sitting in the presence of, and what needs is it designed to meet?
Thank you, Herman. Yes, the macrogrid concept was actually something that there were a number of entities. FERC was one, and we were working, my reliability head at the time, Joe McClellan, and his engineering team had put together some ideas about that. There was also concepts that came out of one of the ISOs. I believe it was the Mid-Continental ISO had a concept for a macrogrid, and I believe also that NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, had formulated a concept, but they were all similar. The idea was to ultimately interconnect the regions across the country, and also interconnect the two major east and west connects in the United States together, so you could transfer between them, and ideally also connect Texas, because Texas is sort of the third interconnect in the U.S. So you'd have all three would be strongly interconnected, primarily by DC ring bus infrastructure, so that they are not synchronous right now, so you wouldn't make the whole thing synchronous. And the idea to not make the whole thing synchronous, you would actually also break up the regions as well with DC ring buses, but very strong interconnections within the regions with high voltage AC lines, and then these DC ring bus lines to interconnect the regions. And by doing that, you could actually make the entire system more resilient, more reliable, more deliverability, less congestion, and lower costs across the entire United States. In essence, the idea of an interstate highway system across the United States at the transmission level for transmission of electrons instead of delivery of goods and services and cars and vehicles.
Yeah, I really like that analogy of the highway system. I'm not a big fan of analogies generally, but the idea that you could have some goods, let's say in Pennsylvania, and you want to sell them as widely as you can because they're the best possible goods. But when you get on the highway, you can only get as far as Chicago because the highway system stops there. And so anybody that's in Denver has to get their own goods, and they may cost more, they may be harder to come by. It's that's really how our system today works, isn't it?
It does, and it's really causing consumers' costs to go up, and we're seeing affordability with respect to electric retail costs being a major political issue, and it's going to continue to be a political issue unless and until we can start delivering the lowest cost power across the country.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about those cost benefits. What can you tell us? I know that there are costs. I know that there are benefits from the lowest cost uh, generation. And it's very interesting because if you think about electricity, maybe if you live someplace with very expensive electricity, it might be 20, 30, 40 cents per kilowatt hour. But when you talk about, what is it, 340 million Americans, that's a lot of money per kilowatt hour. Um, so the benefits obviously are very great if you can cut a few cents off of that. But there are costs to build it, and that's going to be a lot of money, isn't it, John? And on the other hand, there are a lot of barriers to even get to the point where you can spend that money. Tell us a little bit about the costs, benefits, and barriers.
Well, there certainly are tremendous costs associated with building that type of system, but I think the benefits would be returned to customers very quickly. I mean, you can look at just the benefits that we've seen in the Western United States, not necessarily building new infrastructure, but simply opening up the West to a larger market and thereby allowing there to be market deliveries of power across the West. In doing that, they've already saved, I believe several $billions over the last 10 years by having a Western energy imbalance market. You can also look at, the opening up of the market in Louisiana, Arkansas, in the Southeast area, where that area joined MISO a number of years ago, and there are also tremendous benefits in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars
Yeah,
to.
I was hoping, John, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was hoping you'd tell that story. You were chair and you tried to talk some folks into joining in a regional grid. And if I remember the story correctly, at one point, the people who were opposed to the idea of joining the region were astonished at what the benefits were. Do you remember that? Can you tell us that story real
Yeah, I
briefly?
can. And actually, there's a little bit of other nuance to it, Herman, in that actually the commissions in the area, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, Arkansas, all came to me because they were concerned about the fact that one of their utilities was not letting competitive generators come into the area and provide competitive energy services and lower costs for consumers. So I convened a hearing in South Carolina. It was a joint hearing between FERC and all those state commissions. We brought in the utility. The utility was Entergy at the time, put their executives under oath, examine them with respect to their practices. And at the end of that hearing, I said, well, if there's any skeptics here as to how much could be saved by having Entergy join a independent market where there'd be independent determination of interconnection of generation and more reduction of congestion through that, let's do a study. And I FERC will put up the money. We put up $500,000 to do a study to determine what would be the net benefits over, a 10-year period. And we did that, and the benefits were huge. They were almost $1 billion over that period of time, based on the study. I can't remember who did the study at the time, but it was an independent, third-party consulting firm that we hired to do the study. We disseminated the study to all the state commissions, and all the state commissions immediately initiated proceedings to require Entergy to join an RTO. The history there was, in fact, they did join the RTO. They joined the Mid-Continental ISO, and as a result, they've saved ratepayers in those service areas of Entergy now, probably over $1 billion.
I've heard that studies have shown that the benefits for larger transmission, interregional transmission, for instance, pay off at a rate of about $3 for every dollar spent. I don't know if you've heard that
No,
estimate.
I've heard similar figures, Herman, and I think the benefits pay off at that level, and I think they pay off at a very fast rate. I think you'd see, returns of, less than 10 years and perhaps less than 5 years. And again, what we need to do is have capital to do this. And I think the federal government has to step up. I mean, the federal government has provided loan guarantees for things like the Vogtle nuclear power plants in Georgia. They've put in, provided loan guarantees for a number of other things. If we did the same thing for an interstate transmission system to interconnect the regions in this country, the benefits would be huge.
It's interesting that energy was the opponent in that process that you just described. I've heard a lot of times the local utilities are the opponents because they have already invested in their own transmission, their own generation, and so it's disadvantageous to them to allow a wider regional process or interregional process to go forward. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, if you're a monopolist, Herman, you don't want competition. Is basically it's as simple as that. And ultimately, what this does is it brings in competition into regions where formerly it did not exist. So, the intent here is to foster competition as much as possible. Something this current administration should be all for.
Okay, and if anybody from Entergy is listening and they want to reply, I'd love to have you on to tell your side of the story. But Jon, I want to move on. We have a big effort right now going on in Washington, D.C. To reform and streamline siting and permitting of energy projects and other building projects. Do you think that could change the ability of building out a macrogrid, putting it in reach for the first time since you were at FERC?
It,
And
it,
which reforms might be the best?
it could help. I mean, siting certainly has been one of the barriers in addition to access to capital and planning as well. I mean, you have to plan for the project also. But I don't think siting is the whole picture. But certainly siting was something that we worked on while I was at FERC, and it's something that's continually been updated some. Although there is provisions, for example, in the 2005 Energy Policy Act that allow FERC to be, in essence, the backstop for siting projects, transmission projects in this country, and to facilitate acceleration of that siting process. But that act has never been effectively used. So there is already legislation on the books that could be used in a way to accelerate siting of transmission in the country. But I think they may need additional legislation to foster more flexibility in that act as well. And states are very concerned, obviously, about their jurisdiction being taken away. You can see that right now in the ANOPR related to data centers, where states are very concerned about how FERC's going to interact with large loads and whether FERC's going to take some jurisdiction with respect to that large load interconnection away from the states. So, we have to have, I think, the federal government step in, work with the states, and ensure that these issues can be resolved so we can move forward. Because there is no other country that I know of on the globe that plans transmission on a state-by-state basis and doesn't do it on a national basis. I mean, you can just take a map of China, for example, and its transmission system, and set it right next to a map of the United States transmission system. And it's appalling to look at how unconnected our system is across regions versus how China's system is connected extremely strongly from east to west and north to south across the entire country. Very, very well interconnected versus our.
And as a result, it's been able to use an enormous amount of low-cost energy in the form of wind and sun and battery storage, whereas our efforts are stuck in interconnection queues.
That's correct. Huge amounts of solar and wind in Mongolia and the eastern provinces, western provinces in China that can go to the eastern load centers in Guangzhou and Shenzhen and Shanghai and Beijing, where all the manufacturing and production is.
Okay.
They've been very smart there of how they've built up their transmission system to ensure that they can deliver to the lowest cost electrons as efficiently as possible and do it in a reliable manner.
If you want to hear the big last exchange of this terrific conversation, support the podcast by subscribing at just $2.99 per month to the Power Sector Podcast's Power More. With your subscription, you'll get both parts of the content delivered directly to you the second they drop.